Now, I do a lot of work on responsible innovation and trying to have organizations think in an ethical way, which has not been wildly working, to be honest. So in recent years, I've actually been coming to see that the law really is where we have to start. And I love your quote about human rights law as opposed to ethics. You call human rights law ethics with teeth, and I really like that. But explain to us about how ethics and human rights work together.
I mean, ultimately, human rights is the legal embodiment of ethics. It comes from ethics. And, if you study law, you have to study ethics as well. Human rights law is a way of saying, these are the very clear boundaries. I mean, that said, the way the law works is iterative, and where those boundaries are develops over time, both through looking at particular case studies and saying, here's the limit and here's not. But also as our societies develop. So we see human rights law evolves with us. It's not set in stone. And I think that's something that's very different from the way, for example, the US Constitution is viewed. When we look at international human rights law, particularly from a European perspective, they are absolutely viewed as living instruments. And so it's not what the drafters meant, it's what those concepts mean today which matters, and which makes human rights law a very progressive way of dealing with ethics. And so one example of that is, the Isle of Man, where I come from, was slightly unfortunately the home of a really seminal judgment in the European Court of Human Rights, where in the 1970s, the Isle of Man was still using corporal punishment on young men who were convicted of violent offences generally. So they would be given the birch by police as a legal corporal punishment. Now, corporal punishment was common across the Council of Europe when the European Convention on Human Rights was developed, 20, 30 years before. So the big question was, by the 1970s, was corporal punishment inhuman and degrading treatment or punishment? And the court decided that yes, by the 1970s it was, because pretty much all Council of Europe countries had abolished corporal punishment in that time. And so while for the drafters it would have been pretty much straightforward, a normal part of life, by the 1970s it wasn't. And that's how human rights law has remained really current, and how we see its development being applied to technology and practice. And it's one of the things that we've seen around the right to private life, how that has been adapted and evolved, particularly through the use of the right to protection of our personal data, to make it really relevant and developed for the 21st century. And we're only now really starting to talk about the right to freedom of thought in that context. But human rights law has the power and the ability to adapt to new situations and create new legal frameworks that we can all use.